Thank you all for coming here bright and early. I've been doing these events for Politics Exchange for 4 or 5 years now, and police and crime commissioners has always been there in the background as a sort of slightly woolly sort of political concept, but never sort of a reality. And it's always been one of those things which it's always seemed a long way away, but now there's a month to go. They really are upon us. And what I think we're keen to find out this morning is just how much enthusiasm there is out there for police and crime commissioners. Whether people like myself in London, sort of have a sense of just what's going on the ground, whether or not the candidates are finding that the public want to engage with it, whether this is an idea that's going to be a success. The polling is not tremendously positive. There are suggestions of a turnout of maybe 18–19%. The most recent poll, I think, was done by Rusi last week and suggested that only half of the population think PCCs will be a help in the fight against crime. So, on that note, I'd be very keen to hear whether or not we think in a year's time we're going to be sat here thinking this has been a great success, or whether or not it may all turn out to be something of a disappointing damp squib. So no more for me to say, other than a thank you to Julia Mulligan, who stepped in at the very last moment when Matt Bennett was unable to make it. She's the PCC candidate for the City of York and North Yorkshire. So over to Stephen to begin.
Well, James, thank you for that introduction. I of course can answer none of your open questions. So I thought I'd go with the questions I was given in my briefing sheet. First of all, I think it's an important point that you raised, which is the idea of an election. And of course, London is very different from the rest of the country, because the person who got the mandate, and that's the start point to be able to bring about change. You need a mandate for change rather than the status quo. And I think it's important that you do get a lot of people to vote for you. And of course, the person who got the mandate in London was Boris Johnson. And how I came into this post was that on the Saturday after Boris got re-elected, rather narrowly, but against the the block vote, if you like, that solidly went Labour. London went solidly Labour, and he got a personal mandate, a very strong mandate, over 1 million votes for the second time. And I think that's very historic, because it happened for the first time when he got elected in 2008. So he got that mandate, and then for some reason he called me on the Saturday. And to be fair, there was, politics, everyone thinks this is all cooked up. I had absolutely no idea that he would want to have me for the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime. And I'd already decided to step down as leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council, and to sort of engage in a sort of semi-retirement activity in some neighbourhood community budgeting. So the next 4 days were spent trying to persuade my wife that it was a jolly good idea to be the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. And it was sold to me as a sort of, not as necessarily a full-time job, something you could turn up maybe on Monday morning and do, and all that sort of, I was reeled in like a kipper, and said yes. And I have absolutely no regrets. But it's very different for me as a politician, being asked by the Mayor to do a job, than being elected with a personal mandate, as the candidates are doing in November. But the mandate is absolutely important. And Boris, has a manifesto. It had a very clear manifesto around policing and crime, and our first duty is to deliver Boris's manifesto for London, and we'll be judged against that. I think the second thing that we have to do, and what we can expect in the first years, is there's something called the budget. And the second mission, if you like, is to ensure that we have a plan to work within the resources that we have, and those resources are diminishing. And I think that takes time to develop a solid plan, because in London they had a stay of, I call it a stay of execution, but it really was a stay of execution. We had the Olympic year, we had an injection of about 90 million, and now we have a really serious job of work to try and reduce the resources needed to police London safely and effectively whilst cutting crime. And I think police and crime commissioners up and down the country will face budgetary challenges, and they have to have a very clear sense of how you can both continue to cut crime, which is absolutely the most important thing, but do that whilst cutting costs. And we've set an ambition, and we did that with the Mayor in the first open challenge meeting with the public. We call it the 20-20-20 challenge. So the first 20% is to cut high volume, high impact neighbourhood crime types that the public notice by 20% over 4 years. And the second 20% is to see a boost in public confidence. And I think this is equally important. I think actually cutting crime is incredibly important, but I also believe that we need to see a boost in public confidence as well. And I know Gordon disagrees with me, but I still think in London, the situation we find ourselves in London is entirely appropriate that we think about how the police can be the first public service. So it's Peel's comment, the police are the public are the police, and the Met brand is a pretty much, well, I mean, certainly on my chart, the lowest it's been for some time. And I was struck by the negativity of senior politicians of all parties about the police. When as I prepped for this role, talked to former Home Secretary, former chairs of the MPA, unbelievably negative, except for one person, that was Michael Howard, who was unbelievably positive, actually. You know, he's always been an outlier, but you know, it was, you know, that was more uplifting because I personally had a huge admiration for the police and the work that they do, particularly the work where they go into danger, and we're reminded by that with the death of 2 young women police officers in Manchester. But you know, this is a tough job we're asking them to do, particularly in London, where there's a huge amount of youth violence, but also other crime types, the silent crime types around economic crimes, you know, quadrupling of the amount of fraud in businesses, which, you know, affect all kinds of businesses, not just the large businesses, but also the small and medium-sized enterprises. So, you know, that's the mission that we've set the police, and I think that after the mandate, a very clear mission is very important. But it's not just about the police. I think, you know, the architect of this was Nick Herbert, who said this is about the criminal justice system. And the third thing is we're trying to think about how we bring a coherence that does not exist today across the criminal justice system in London. It is an absurdity that we have these silos that actually cost shunt up and down the criminal justice system. So we want to see a much more integrated approach. And frankly, it's not a big ask to do that in London, to provide oversight for the entire criminal justice system budget. I've only just got the statistics for a conference. We spend £3.6 billion on policing London. The entire criminal justice system is less than 4.5. So it's peanuts by comparison. So I think you can have and it's all coterminous. It's the CPS, the courts, if you look at youth justice. So why can't we start to think about the whole criminal justice system and how we drive down crime, both by preventing crime in the first place, and that's not just the job of the police, although they can, you know, I think it's important to think about prevention as well as cutting crime, but equally to stop the reoffending downstream, if you like, where we see a lot of public services stepping away from their responsibilities as budgets become a little bit tighter. I mean, particularly, you see invisible walls with the health service. You go into places like Felton, and where are the health service providing the basic services for these very disturbed young people? What are they doing when people arrive in A&E and clearly have mental health problems? What are they doing when they're in custody suites? So we need to see and break down some of those invisible walls. But so that was the, you know, how do we approach, the next question is how do we approach police and crime commissioners in austerity? Now all of you may know that I have a record of taking cost out judiciously and cutting taxes, because there's only one thing that I hate, and that's taxation. In fact, I actually also hate regulation, or over-regulation as well. But now how do we do this in policing? I want you to remember all the police and crime commissioner candidates out there, remember the 3 R's, a common sense approach to police budgets. It's the first R is to reduce waste, duplication, and the overhead of delivering policing. When we had the boom years under Labour from 2003, okay, we may have seen a slight increase in the uniform, but actually we saw an enormous splurge on the back and middle office. Vast numbers of people, an army of people that do nothing to do with keeping people safe, supporting the police service. That's where we saw the growth. Look at those numbers and ask yourself whether we can reduce the back office, we can reform it judiciously and ensure that more of the resources goes into the powers that the police have to keep us safe in our cities. The second R is to release underutilised assets. Now, we have to redefine the connection between the public and the police in a new way that is not based on the Victorian counter model. I mean, it's absolutely essential that we think about public access, and why don't we divorce that from custody? Why are they coterminous? We should have an experience for the public that re-engages them with the police makes them understand that, and that is very, very important to get that right. And then you can release underutilised assets. It costs 200 million a year just to run a shabby Victorian, largely Victorian Edwardian police estate with a few PFIs that cost a bucket load of money. That's the second R. And my third R, I know you're trying to shut me up, my third R is, but it's very important to get the third R. The third R is then to reform, because I think that's what this is all about. This is all about positive change to the way that we keep ourselves safe. This is the first duty of the state. Order is the precondition of prosperity, and we do have to find new ways of doing it. Now, with loads of people in post thinking about this for the local areas, I think we're going to herald an era of many, many new things, many of which will succeed and some of which will fail, but that doesn't matter. That's what reform is all about, bringing about positive change for our communities.
Thank you very much. On that point of mandate and on the first decisions which the Commission are going to have to take will be tough. It almost immediately will be straight into a budget settlement from the Home Office, which we know will be very, very small. How important is a strong mandate in being able to take those decisions and therefore also give the role some meat? I'll turn if I may.
Okay. I have a very strong view about this. I don't mind at all about the mandate. I couldn't care if there's only 6 people voting, as long as the Conservative candidate wins. I have no view about the mandate. I don't think it matters. It can be literally 10 people, as long as we have 6 of them and they have 4. It doesn't matter. It's all nonsense, by the way. This is our enemies have been going around saying this policy is going to be a failure because 65% of the people are not going to vote, or because it's going to be 10%. This is rubbish. It's only our enemies who say this because they want to have some way of showing that this government, has made a mistake. It's a terrible policy. They try to attack it on every other possible way, operational interference and all that. The last one, finally, they grasped the straw. It's a failure because people won't show up. It's got nothing to do with people showing up. I know countries where 100% people vote. Is that democratic? I mean, we are giving individuals, everyone in this country has an opportunity to vote, England and Wales. If they don't vote, is that a failure? We changed the whole way policing operates, from taking it out of 2 Marsham Street. Before, it was run by the Home Office and assisted a bit by the Home Secretary and the Minister of Policing, but mainly run by officials. We've changed that, and we're giving people up and down the country an opportunity to decide the kind of policing they want. Now, they said, on the whole, I am shocked by how little people are interested in this, and then on the other hand, why should I be shocked if for the last 150 years no one's ever asked them what they want about policing? So why should suddenly, whatever, Stockholm Syndrome or something, they suddenly say, you now have a chance to talk about policing. Well, how? Policing is operational. No, policing is about resources. Went to a meeting yesterday, Countryside Alliance, extremely interesting. Here was the first time an opportunity is going to be given to individuals to vote for someone who understands rural crime or takes interest in rural crime. Before, it was up to the chief constable. Most chief constables have never been anywhere near the country. They've all come from the Met, they come from the Met. As far as officials are concerned, the only country they know is in France. So what do they know about policing, in Northumbria? What do they know about policing in rural areas of Yorkshire and so on? So finally, we're saying to the people in Yorkshire and in Northumbria and everywhere else, you have a chance to choose someone who will be alive to your concerns, who will share your concerns, probably your neighbor. And they say, oh, we don't want that. We'd rather have a man at 2 Marsham Street decide that, who's never been anywhere near here and doesn't know anything about policing. I find it difficult to get my mind around this, except that I know if you condition people long enough and tell them long enough that they have no say, it's not really their business, then after a while they believe you. So that's why I'm not surprised the polls say no one wants to come out, because no one really understands this. I spoke yesterday to the National Convention of the Conservative Party, and several people got up, and I had the same reaction I get when I speak at these fundraisers up and down the country. They say, wow, that's a really good idea, PCCs. My God, there's less than 2 months to go before the election. They finally, someone in the back of the hall who's an activist in the Conservative Party, not an activist conservative, actually put their hand up and say, wow, that's really good. You ought to be on YouTube, someone said. Yeah, you ought to be on YouTube making this case, because we didn't know that there's quite an interesting case for this. This is quite a good idea. I mean, it's shocking how little people in the Conservative Party understand what this government did. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if ministers hadn't worked so hard. Do you know how hard it was for Nick Herbert to get that bill through the Commons? Every day, attacked by AGPO, attacked by the Labour Party, attacked by the APA, attacked by the Lib Dems. Yeah. He was up in committee for day after day after day trying to get this bill. Theresa has had to put up with terrible reactions from the Federation and everybody else. And what do our members think has been going on all this time? I mean, they obviously don't read the newspapers, or they don't take any notice, because, seriously, these two politicians, the Home Secretary and Nick Herbert, have worked so hard for so long and taken so much stick from everyone, and yet at the end of the day we have members at the convention saying that, wow, that's a really good idea. Why didn't someone tell us about this thing? That really sounds good.
But what, 6 weeks to go, what does the government do? Maybe what should the Prime Minister do now to try and I mean, that's the most passionate,
I forget. They can't do anything more. You want to get, I don't mind if very few years, we're going to get people out and people are going to vote and fine. I'll tell you what the difference is. In a year from now, when we have the next conference in the US, then, by the way, everyone's going to want to shake the hands of the PCCs, not the other way around. Now the PCC candidates are the unknown people. Absolutely no one cares. All they care about is Corby by-election. Everybody is in the Corby by-election. And the PCC election is regarded as a way of getting more interest in Corby. It's not the other way around. So that's what we look at. But I put it to you, that next year, the major figures at this conference are going to be the PCCs. And they're going to be the people with all the power. People are going to be trying to suck up to them because, please, there's a problem in Sussex, or please, there's a problem in my community. And they are going to be the people who are going to be making headlines, making history. And I don't think there's any doubt about it. It's going to completely turn the thing on its head. So people won't be saying, as they do now, literally, what is this about? Or naively, wow, what a good idea. Now, I'll tell you what I am concerned about, and that is the training of PCCs. That's an issue that I really feel is very, very important. Now, a blank sheet of paper, that's the training program for PCCs. The government didn't think they needed a training program. First of all, it was a matter of money, and then they don't think they needed it because who can't be Home Secretary? There's no training for Home Secretary. So why, no training for MP, so why do you want training for PCC? Well, it's so different from MPs. MPs just sit there for a couple of 4 years, 5 years, 20 years, and then gradually weaned into it, sent to as a parliamentary secretary, and officials hold their hand and write the letters for them. All they have to do is learn how to sign their name. I mean, there's practically nothing else to do. And I tell you, as someone who spent 27 years as an official, if they can write their name, then they're done, because and read, by the way, I'm sorry, and to read speeches and write their name to sign letters. That's all they have to do.
Fantastic advert for the job.
And then they're taught, exactly, and then they're trained and so on. And then it becomes these people on day one are going to make major decisions about policing in their community. They're going to have to do budgets. They're going to do strategic plans. They're going to have to learn about leadership. They're going to learn about statistics. They're going to have to learn about, there's so much to know, and I think the challenge is absolutely immense, and they're not getting any training, and the people are going to have to we're all going to have to rally around and help them, because they will affect the community life in this community, in our communities. If you have a hopeless PCC who takes no interest, it's going to be worse than it is now, because you have the Home Office hands off, and the Chief Constable will just have to do everything. That moment they do everything subject to Home Office advice, then they'll have to do everything without any Home Office advice, so it's going to be worse. But a PCC who really wants to do something will transform, I believe, people's community. It will transform the quality of life for all of us living in these communities. And As I say, I think that now the polls, of course, the polls are low now. But when we next year, and by the way, in 4 years' time, everyone's going to be scrambling for this job. At the moment, this time we couldn't get candidates. None of the parties could get candidates. It was very, very difficult. People didn't want to put themselves forward. It's a very difficult job. You can fall flat on your face. It's very much in the public eye, and very few people, except brave people like Julia, were prepared to step in on a panel 3 seconds before it begins, or put themselves forward. Victoria here, or we've got a great lot of candidates. We were very, very lucky to get those candidates. Believe me, very lucky. But I bet you in 4 years' time, we're going to have all the opportunists, all the people who want to be in the paper. They'll be chasing after it, and it will be a very, very significant job. By then, of course, there won't be any vacancies because all the incumbents will be there, and so that's those are my concerns.
Very positive note. I'll move on to Edward. Policy exchange with the architect of this idea, along with Nick, and I just wonder how policy exchange feel about where we are now, whether or not you're perhaps disappointed that the government haven't been able to promote it more, and with the fact that the elections are in November, which I think is probably a real downside, and I think we'll come to regret that. And also, I wonder if you feel that you would have preferred this idea to be launched in a time that wasn't a time of austerity, where PCCs really will be dealing with cutting, rather than, do you think it's important?
No, I think it's important.
But keen to hear from Edward.
Sure. Well, on the first point, I think when it comes to turnout, if there's only, say, 20%, I've got to agree with Gordon here, if there's a 20% turnout, that's around 7 million people voting in their police and crime commissioners. That's better than now, where we have 0 people voting in people they don't know about. Regarding your second question about is it bad that this is happening in a time of austerity, I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to say it's good, because it will force these people to make difficult decisions that people have ignored for years. And I want to talk about that. I want to change the tack slightly. I want to talk a bit about how this is going to affect communities. How will PCCs coming in actually affect the public on the ground? And the first way, I think, first important point to make is that we can't actually know, because one of the most important things about this reform is it's going to localise the way the policing is delivered. No longer are you going to have a national dictum from Whitehall, from the Home Office, that says this is how policing will be across the land. Actually, no. Now, from the 15th of November, we're going to have police and crime commissioners deciding for each force area, what is it that force needs? What is it that public is crying out for? And that mixed together the personality of each individual PCC are really going to affect how things look like. Amongst this kind of smorgasbord of potential police changes that we're going to get, I want to argue passionately for any PCs in the room, or persuade members of the public, one thing that I think that there'll be more of, and that's this, police visibility. There are many things that might change. But police visibility is something that across all force areas, at all points, every year it's being polled, the public consistently come out and say, we want more of this. One of the primary things that bringing police and crime commissions is going to do is going to make the public voice louder in the setting of police priorities. So it would be ludicrous if this didn't take centre stage. And this is where it comes back to the idea of doing this in a time of austerity. If we weren't in a time of austerity, this decision would be easy. We will just simply hire more and more and more officers and put more of them on the front line. Yes, some in the middle and back office, but I'm sure it would increase somehow. That's kind of how things have been done when we weren't in times of austerity. Being in a time of austerity means that we have to take difficult decisions that have been ignored. Not only does it mean that we have to be more effective, more efficient with back and middle office functions, have to consider, for each police force is using private businesses and third sector organisations to help deliver some of these functions a good thing to do. That's a difficult question. It now has to be answered because there's no other options. Another thing I think we'll see a big change in is a move to more single crewing of police officers. This is something that lots of chief constables have been saying, we're doing this, and then you ask the public in the area and they say, no, you weren't. We did a poll last year and we asked the public, what's more likely are you to see, double crewing or single crewing? And it turned out that seeing double-crewed police officers was twice as likely as single-crewed police officers. Now, of course, there are some areas, we've seen some horrific issues in policing in recent times, where double-crewing is a necessity, where safety of police officers is paramount. It always is, but in some areas the risk is low enough that we should be single patrolling. That should be the norm, it shouldn't be the exception. The benefit of doing this will not only be a greater visibility of the police force, which is what the public want, but they're going to be more approachable as well. If you're walking along the street with a good friend of you, next to you, you will naturally be conversing with them, you'll naturally be giving your attention to them. If you are on your own, you're far more likely to be far more approachable because you'll be engaging more with members of the public, and that is what they want, and that's what I hope PCCs will bring in. Second point I want to make is a more strategic point, but I think nonetheless will affect communities just as much, and it's this. I want to argue that bringing in police and crime commissioners is going to create a far more effective structure for fighting crime. And I think this will have some significant consequences for communities across England and Wales. Allow me to explain. I think at the moment the police lack a strong and powerful advocate. This has led to some fairly ludicrous situations, and a lot of our research will go around police forces continually. And one of the best stories I heard from a police force was that, or the worst stories depending which way you look at it, they had businesses phoning up the police getting their drivers to ask for directions, and they went to go and speak to this business and asked why. They said, well, you always give us directions and it's cheaper than paying for GPS devices. This is a fairly ludicrous example, but still just kind of highlights part of the problem. There's plenty of other more serious examples as well. We've got a paper coming out next month called Policing 2020 that's going to kind of set the scene and say what do we want policing to look like in 8 years' time. And for this, we did a questionnaire where we asked chief constables what they thought of the support they received from their police partners. Of the half who replied, 86% of chief constables were not satisfied with the support from mental health providers, 71% weren't satisfied with the support they received from state children and care homes. And there's plenty more that will come out when we're doing this next month. This isn't acceptable, and if you look behind it, there's good reasons, especially in children's care homes where there's an issue of lack of looking after missing people and putting in preventative measures. This is something that police and crime commissioners should look to change. They are not just responsible for holding the police to account. I'm sure you've heard this scores of times, but I'll say it again. They're not police commissioners, they're police and crime commissioners. And more importantly than that, it's not just in their title. The public are going to hold these police and crime commissioners account for reducing crime. If they don't manage to reduce crime and everyone else does, they're not going to get elected. There will be the opportunity for these scores of people wanting to come into be a PCC if the incumbents don't manage to reduce crime and increase confidence. Now, to do that, they will need to make sure that everybody is playing their part in the fight against crime. Don't get me wrong in this, the police play the central role in the fight against crime. However, it requires all of us, be it businesses, be it communities, be it government partners, to play their part in the fight against crime for it to be successful, and especially so in a time of austerity. Whether PCCs take up their role with as much vigour, this part of the role with as much vigour as I'd like, will remain to be seen. I think the training would have helped with that. But where they do, I think the public aren't just going to benefit from more personalised, localised and visible police service, but they'll benefit from one where everyone is playing their part in the fight against crime. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Right, we'll turn to Julia. I mean, the issues that Edward was raising there, when you're knocking on doors and explaining you're a police commissioner candidate, what do you think the public want from this role?
I think the first thing is I think that the public don't know about the role firstly, so the first thing you have to do is explain what the role is to them, and when you do that they actually like the idea, which is really, really encouraging. So I think locally, and I do think it is largely going to be down to candidates locally, we really have a job to do actually to get out in front of the media and explain what this is all about. And I would just also like to say that we need to be careful with our Labour opponents because they are using this as a platform against cuts. So it's very easy when you're on the radio or whatever it is with your Labour opponent to get drawn into a political argument about cuts, and the public do not want to hear that. So you really have to be careful to deflect that and have a proper conversation about the impact that this role will have in local communities. And so I think that's something that we as candidates need to be mindful of, is not to get into those political arguments. The other thing that I'd also like to say, I think, is that there is I mean, my North Yorkshire and the City of York is one of the safest areas in the whole of England, perhaps possibly the safest with the exception of the City of London. And so I think there are relatively small numbers of people who actually engage with the police and the criminal justice system. So a lot of people are not that engaged with it because they don't have to be, because it's a low crime area. And I do think that sometimes there is a bit of a denial about the seriousness of crime. I mean, there are 80,000 victims in North Yorkshire if you take antisocial behaviour and reported crime, and that is just far too many. And I think there's a degree of complacency around the problem and how we need to tackle it. And so there is this disconnect between what those involved in the system are doing and what the public are actually saying and what they want, and they definitely do want more visible policing. There's also some evidence to suggest that things like antisocial behaviour problems are much greater than actually the statistics would suggest as well, and I think that is a big problem that we need to deal with. So in the short term, antisocial behaviour might be seen to go up as we sort of lift the lid on some of those issues. The other thing I'd also like to say, I think, is around the whole sort of crime prevention agenda and the plethora of people that are involved in this. And it is just incredibly complicated. In North Yorkshire, 2/3 of the money goes on admin. So that's just utterly ridiculous. We have to cut through all of that admin, and we have to get resources deployed onto the front line. And I have to say that talking to people involved in that, some of the senior people, they see that and they want to put these partnerships on a sustainable footing. So I think there is an acknowledgement that that is happening. And finally, I think the last thing I'd like to say is that I think for individual PCCs there is an opportunity to really harness this and grab it with both hands and really use it in the early stages as a way to demonstrate things are changing. So that's one of the things that I would like to do. I think there is a great deal of interest in the sort of community of policing and criminal justice in this post, and those involved in it realise what a fundamental change it is. And I think individual PCCs need to recognise that and grip that with both hands and get stuck into it. So that's my view.
One final question from me, and then I'll throw it over to you guys. But one thing which came out of I think all of your different points was this is not just about crime. This is about dealing with the whole issue, which is going to mean, as I think you said, Stephen, banging heads together in mental health, in social services, all the people who sort of dump their problems upon the police. Will the commissioners have the power that they need to tell these people that they need to shape up, or will you just get the shrug from social services saying, you can't tell me what to do, I'll carry on doing it just as I have before?
Well, this is where I think the era of austerity works for you, because councils are feeling the squeeze. I've been a council leader for 6 years, and they're an incredibly important partner on the ground of kind of weaving together these services. A lot of them are rooted in local authorities. And certainly my understanding, and even if the funding is cut, in London we'll have a community safety pot. We're going to take the old Heseltine approach of getting people to come up with their good ideas with a solid evidence base and back those. But I worked out over 4 years we probably have about 100 million that we can get together that hopefully will encourage a lot of innovation and certainly get some attention. The other thing is, once you're elected, in this case through the mayor, you start to shape the agenda. So the very first public meeting we had was around seeking justice for victims, and it became patently clear to me this wasn't just a police matter. We had to have the CPS there, we had to have the courts there, and you had to have a good, vigorous public debate about why so many trials. I mean, once you've got the collar, if you like, once you've solved the crime, and we need to solve more crimes, quite frankly, but once you've done that, you then go through the criminal justice system. And the CPS was having a lot of cases that broke down very late in the day, a very costly way, and also the courts were a bit old-fashioned, frankly. Haven't yet embraced the digital era, and we were able to have what it was described as a ladybird discussion of the criminal justice system. I think that was a bit insulting to me, but that was sort of but I think that's half the problem, frankly. If you listen to people from where there are elected people involved, they use language the public understand. The problem with the criminal justice system in this country is to use a load of old gobbledygook that no one understands. So we've got to reconnect by using simple language, and I think you can show leadership once you're in post, and you can start to weave people and hold people to account.
I think that's the answer. I mean, I don't exactly. I want to endorse what Stephen just said. What's going to happen, I think, if we focus on the objective, which is to reduce crime. That's what the Home Secretary. I'm going to stand up because there's something I can't see and they can't see. The Home Secretary wants to reduce crime. We set that as an objective. I think once that happens, then the PCCs, just as Stephen said, will naturally begin to recognize that in order to do the job, you have to go beyond the police. I don't think we need to prescribe any of this stuff, because they'll look after 6 months, they'll see, there seems to be crime not going down, maybe there's a problem, and then the Chief Constable knows this too. He says, yeah, of course there's a problem. As soon as we lock them up, they let out, or because of their families, or because they've got nothing for them to do. And suddenly the PC says, yeah, that's great. In order to achieve my objective, reducing crime, I better go beyond it. So I think all we need to do is stick to very simple principles. Namely, this is to reduce crimes, the Home Secretary said many, many times. That's your objective. Get on with it. And how you get on with it will naturally lead to other bits of the criminal justice system. I want to, in this context, disagree with Edward. I'm sorry to disagree with him, because the policy exchange plays such a big role in all this. I don't believe in visibility. Sorry. Visibility is a red herring. People don't want visibility. They want safety. Police safety. Visibility is a way of achieving it, perhaps. But to say people want visibility, I'll tell you what, if crime is up then they want visibility, because the crime's up anyway. We might as well see the cops because it looks good, and we see them, we feel good. That's what the middle classes love. They love to see cops on their street, and they get upset if they're not, and they're very voluble, and they make a fuss about it. People want safe houses, safe playgrounds, safe thing. And let's not, I don't want to bog the PCCs down so that they give orders to their chief constables to have police visibility. That will let the police chief constables off the hook. You'll say, well, of course we could have solved more crime, of course we could have prevented it, but you wanted visibility, so I put a lot of people on the street. They're not doing anything, but you wanted them on the street, so they're on the street. Don't give them any excuses. The job to the chief constable is, your job is to reduce crime. And if you can't reduce it, you will get someone else who can. In New York or in Philadelphia, no one ever talked about visibility. We looked at the crime figures every single day, and every week, and every month. No one ever said, how many people we have on the street? Because it didn't matter how many people on the street. Sometimes you were dealing with serious drug dealing. You don't want people in uniform on the street. You want people in the back doing the analysis, doing the studies. You want people undercover. They're on the street, but they're undercover, and so on. So if you want to fight crime, you let the professionals fight it. You just keep them at the job. The other point I want to make is having people on the street and having what's so-called front line is affecting the total amount of some money we're spending on science and technology. I've got to be in my board about this. There's been a real problem in the last few years. Forensic Science Service closed, NPIA closed, no one gripping the major expenditure on IT, on Metropolitan Police. It talks about itself as the biggest, the best force in the world. They have 350 handheld automatic fingerprint reading systems. 350 for a force of so many thousands. Every cop should have an automatic fingerprint reading machine, so if he makes a stop, figuratively you know exactly who it is, you don't have to bring him into the station. But there's a shortage of money, austerity. So put them all on the street, they all walk around, that's fine, but we need technology, and we're neglecting technology. The balance has swung too far against technology. A lot of talk about back office, a lot of talk about transformation in terms of outsourcing and so on. Very little talk about the need for technology, and we've got to go back to that. That's my Gordon, I think you're absolutely right that we should embrace new ways of catching criminals. The thing that I start off with is I'm staggered to know that
and the IT is allegedly not very good. That's what I've been told. I've not witnessed it. It doesn't work. But then why are we spending 103 million a year on shit IT? And why do we spend 103 million? Why is it so bad? And why do we have 803 full-time equivalent posts as well? What are they doing? I don't know. For me, I think the resources are there. They're just being spent on stuff that doesn't work. So, the job of the Police and Crime Commission up and down the country, and I know there's a national moves, our job is to make sure that technology does catch criminals, is going to help these people use the special powers that they have, and isn't a sort of self-serving industry for third-rate IT professionals.
Can I come back quick on the visibility thing? I feel like I need to make an ardent defence of it. If I had more time, what I would have suggested would be that, like Gordon said, actually the bottom line is reducing crime, and I think visibility is the way to do that. You look at
Oh gosh.
Causing quite a stir here.
Gordon was getting quiet. The microphone got upset.
If you look at various scores of academic evidence, first of all, if you look at the aftermath of the seven bombings in London, there was a surge of police activity and an increase of number of officers in visible roles around, in visible positions around London. And there was some evidence done by a guy called Draker from LSE in 2008, which showed an elasticity that if you increase police numbers by 10%, it has an effect of reducing crime by 3%. And that's when that police, that frontline resource isn't targeted in high crime hotspot areas. You can then go further than that, and I believe even in New York, a lot of the reduction in crime is based on the use of a system called CompStat, where it's important to get police officers, visible police officers present into high crime hotspot areas. And there's a lot of evidence from the UK, people like Larry Sherman, in the States, people like Anthony Braga in 2006, that if you take visible police presence, you put it in high crime hotspot areas, that has a dramatic effect, not just of reducing the crime in that area, but it doesn't displace it to other places as well. And I think that is an important thing people need to look at if they want to try and reduce crime.
Hotspot areas, he's absolutely right. Visibility is generally taken as having cops on the street walking around Warwick Square, and there's no crime in Warwick Square. But I know people make a big fuss about it.
They do. I think it will be a brave ECC who said, as you have done, I'm not bothered about visibility.
No, I disagree with you.
Can I come back, because rather than
here's a candidate.
Gordon saying again, Clive Labour and Leicestershire and Rutland candidate, I feel quite strongly about this, and I'll tell you why. Because a lot of people come out and say, we'll
turn around, Clive. I want them to hear you.
Sorry, I should. Clive Labour, PCC candidate for Leicestershire and Rutland and Leicester City, and a lot of people say to me, are you going to increase the number of police on the streets, including in the leafy suburbs of Rutland, particularly people who are interested and worried about rural crime? And I say, not necessarily. Certainly not necessarily all the while. And what you need to understand is that it may be that I'm better off having one more person in CID who will catch the buggers who are nickying the farm equipment or whatever it may be, so they're not there next week to do this. And so, Robert Peel, in the PBN Principles, he said the safety of any community is not defined by the number of police walking the streets. It was true then, and to a large extent it's true now, but with the caveats that Lord Gordon has said, that we need to go around explaining to people why we might make some very difficult decisions. And that's why I think chiefs of police should feel very lucky that they're going to have us, because we will stand behind those difficult decisions and have to explain to local people why on a certain afternoon or a certain time they will see fewer of those people in uniform, but it's for the overall aim, and by the way, of driving down crime. And when it does start to drive it down, then we'll look at it, we'll reinforce success. If it doesn't drive down crime, then we might do something else. But that's exactly what we'll be there in an accountable way in doing all of that, and I hope that chimes with others in the room.
Well, we've got 15 minutes, so if we throw open some questions, if you could try say who you are, and if we could try and make them brief, and if there's someone in particular you would like to hear an answer from, if you could say who you'd like that to be. So.
Simon Gordon Clark from Bethnal Green and Bow. So far we've heard, I think I'm right in saying, absolutely nothing about the race issue. I think one of the most serious problems confronting the police is that there is absolutely no confidence in the police among the ethnic minorities. Now, Julia, I'm warning you, there may not be a very large ethnic minority constituency in the city of York, but there is an ethnic minority archbishop, and he's going to want to know what you think about these things, loud and clear. So that's my point. Thank you.
Very good point. Very good.
So Tim Roberts Holmes from Stereo, which is a large-scale supplier to the police and justice sector. And I was very interested in Stephen's comments because I through my job, get to see a large number of chief constables, both in cities and in rural areas, but focusing on cities. And they would all say unanimously, Tim, there is plenty of money in the system, it's how it's spelt. And I was delighted to hear Stephen talk about the justice system, because to me, this is not about police commissioners or even police and crime commissioners, but with one golden opportunity we have to finally join up our justice system, which is so full of waste. And I often think that the problem is that this whole debate is getting far too focused on police, chief constables, and roles of chief constables. Actually, there is an opportunity to make the whole system far better and massively reduce the cost, most of which is wasted. What I'm keen to understand, though, is that we've had all this high-profile stuff about outsourcing and industry's relationship with police and so on and so on and so on. And police forces joining with police forces to cut some costs in back office, which is actually quite a minimal cost, most of the costs in the middle office and the rest of the justice system. Are we likely now to see a shift towards industry supporting more community or county-based initiatives, whereby we're joining up the police with probation, with social services, with mental health and so on, for the overall benefit of the community, rather than police forces just collaborating with police forces and police forces and police forces, which actually, whilst it reduces a little bit of cost, sure, I cannot necessarily see the end benefit to the community here, which is what I thought this was all about. Sorry, very long rambling speech.
On that point, Stephen, I mean, you've raised it. I mean, how do you go about doing that?
Well, again, I think we've got to find a language that makes those points that people can understand. I mean, one of the first conferences I went to was on something called Integrated Offender Management, or IOM. And then I went to another conference on something called Restorative Justice, or RJ. And I'm not sure that's the kind of lexicon that people understand that these problems require integrated solutions, and they want that to be described to them. And then we have to think about the structures that achieve that. And I think if you don't want cost shunting, then you've got to have a pool of money where the custody's within that pool, because ultimately you then want to try out things that move people away from a custodial sentence with the kind of interventions you've been talking about that require a joined up approach. And then you have the saving in the place, of course, which, you know, direct saving from your budget. But, you know, so it does require that kind of mindset. And when you have a myriad of different budget holders, and frankly it's all because that in politics, just like the police, we have 93 business units in the Met, because that means that 93 little empires with 93 jobs that people can get. In politics, it's exactly the same. You know, we split up the Home Office because you have 2 secretaries of state. You know, we've metastasized into this kind of organisation that's providing career opportunities for people no one's ever heard of. It's absolutely ridiculous. This is one opportunity to reform and bring things together, and I promise you, in London, we will seize that opportunity.
Right, if I can ask them to be brief, because there are lots of hands and not so much time. So if we go to the back.
Oh my God. Sorry, there's somebody with a sea of hands.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Nikki Norman. I'm from Women's Aid Federation England. And we've got a campaign going on at the moment, very much focusing on the role of police and crime commissioners in responding to domestic and sexual violence. And we've got a fringe meeting on that very subject tonight. So my question to you is, what do you see the role of PCCs in responding to violence against women, particularly in relation to prevention?
Julie?
Thank you very much. I'll try and come along to the fringe. I think it's a very important subject, and I think it's something that is sort of not talked about sufficiently. Certainly, I mean, I can only talk about North Yorkshire, but I think that trying to make sure that it is part of the problem with the police and crime commissioners is, as I'm going around and talking to all of the different providers, they think that the PCCs have some magic pot of money that they're coming to the community with, which we can sort of hand out and dole out to various people. So I think one of the things that I think is really important is trying to get some coherence across the piece. So looking at the different organisations that are providing innovative solutions. So for example, in North Yorkshire there's an organisation called Foundation, which instead of taking the victims of domestic crime out of their homes, actually takes the perpetrators of the domestic violence out of their homes instead. And that is a really, really good innovation across North Yorkshire that is actually now spreading across the county. So I think there's some innovative work that is going on, and I think it's a question of looking at what is working really well, and within the times of austerity, assessing where your funding goes and making sure that it's very effectively spent. But I think it's also important to give women a voice, and certainly that is something that I think I would look to do.
Yeah, lady there.
Good morning, I'm Caroline Jones, South Wales PCC candidate. At the moment, and I'm taking on Alan Michael from the Labour Party. At the moment, morale in Wales is low due to the case of the missing 5-year-old April Jones from Llanfairpwll. Could you please tell me what would be the role of the Commissioner in this sad, sad case?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I hadn't had it before, and I hadn't actually thought about it. But it seems to me the role, as in any other really difficult case, is going to be to one of leadership and reassurance of the community. I mean, if they don't feel that the cops are doing the job, that's your responsibility. I mean, so really clearly you've got to be out front there, making people feel that even if a child is not found, or an example when you had a story in the Met when there was a problem and they looked in the house and they wasn't there and they had to come back again, that's a real job for the politicians to reassure the populace that maybe in a particular case a mistake is made. Let me tell you, in Philadelphia when I was the Chief of Staff, there was a problem when by accident the police killed a young black boy, a 3-year-old, in a crossfire. It was terrible. But that's where the mayor, who's the equivalent to it, had to come out and say, look, our force is not a racist, this was an accident, and win the confidence wheel. That's where it made a difference. Chief Constable was up against it, but the mayor, able to support the Chief Constable, if you believe it to be the case, that they have done well, that's where I think it will play an enormously important role. And I think that's where Chief Constable will suddenly discover that they've got someone who supports them. If necessary, by the way, that's not covering up. That's getting out in front of the event before people begin to complain. Very important when you get elected. Get out in front. Don't let the press tell you what's happened. You tell them.
Can I just say, in that particular context, having led as a chief police officer, the response to a major disaster, you need somebody to deal with the politics. In my particular case, I was very lucky because the way of the structure was the chief was out of it and I was running the operations. So the chief dealt with the politics, but in this case, the commissioner can deal with the politics and the chief and all the cops can get on with doing the job. Yeah. And if I recall correctly, after the London riots, Boris Johnson was the first one in front of the camera, with then Tim Godwin standing a pace and a half behind him and sort of stepping forward and saying, this is the operation. So I actually think there is a role there, but it is to reassure.
That's a very important point, and one actually I don't think I've heard a police officer say before. I mean, it can be very helpful for senior police officers. Yes, sir, you know.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, Craig McKinley, I'm the candidate for Kent. I've had the benefit of being on the police authority for a while. I've got to resign next week when the papers go in. But it does give you an insight into a lot of your stats. I mean, these bureaucrats will give you stats until they're coming out of your ears. They actually call them what they are, and I saw one last week. It's about that fat, and it's called The Pack, and it comes out every month. Now, we've got to be very, very careful not to be led by the pack and to do things that just get the stats down. And I'm very fearful of this. Now, let me give you an example. Reoffending rates when the probation service are involved. I mean, I've got very little good to say about the probation service, frankly. I think they do an appalling job, and they've got a lot more to do. If their reoffending rate is low, that looks like the probation service is doing a good job. Does it? Or does it mean the police are not very good at finding the offender who has reoffended? So we've got to be very careful of these stats saying two different things. Now the other one, I'm particularly concerned about drugs, but say in month 11 of our first term, the sanction detection rate is very low. The police could say, I know what we're going to do. Let's go and attack drugs for the month on the streets. So every time we find one, we've got 100% sanction detection rate. So we get the stats up in the last month. So we've got to be very, very careful about letting the stats sort of tail wag the PCC dog. And I'm not entirely sure how we're going to do that just yet.
The legislation has to be changed. No, Home Office regulations, I was going to make a speech on that, but it didn't come off. I was going to make it, and I will one day, and afterwards, because that detection rate is a real problem. We've got to change it. We cannot have sanction detections collected nationally. It's too dangerous. It's simply too dangerous. We've got to say to them, we collect information. You can collect them all you want yourself, but having sanction detection rate as a league table is very, very dangerous. Not that in America. No, they don't collect detection rates, and that's one of the reasons people concentrate on detections, and particularly on those, as you say, the ones which we need to collect in the last few hours of the end of the month.
I think
every cop knows it.
I think as well with that one as well, PCCs aren't just going to be judged on crime, they're going to be judged on whether people feel safe in their communities. And if someone's gaming the figures, the public are going to say, well, you keep saying crime's going down, but I don't feel safer. And I think actually this should be a positive move to actually help try and change that.
Andrew Lillico. 5 years after the first elections take place, what would convince you that introducing elected PCCs had been a bad idea, and what might convince you that the policy had worked even better than you'd hoped?
Well, I mean, look, that's a very interesting point. I would judge it by crime. I mean, personally, I would judge it by how the crime was. I think we will judge it by how the turnout is in the next election. And you'll see, I think, that the next election it'll be a quite different story. It'll be a success if people say, yeah, they're listening, they're doing something that's happening. It'll be a failure. I do think it will be a failure anyway then, by the way. It'll be a failure if crime and antisocial behavior doesn't go down. Then means we haven't even began to grip the problem. Bert's got a question.
Bernard Ricks. James, you made the point at the start that Russ's poll says that 50% of PCCs won't make a difference. My math suggests that means that 50% believe it will make a difference, which seems to me that that's much more newsworthy, given that everybody is complaining that nobody's heard about this.
I think
can I bear with me a second, because I also want to point out that Labour is pointing a very negative election here. It's saying, first of all, that it's going to say no to 20% cuts. It's misleading. It's just the central grant that is cut by 20% and not the totality. And it's also saying no to police privatisation. They're not telling you that actually Labour introduced police privatisation in the Police Reform Act 2002. So my question, I'm now coming to it. What have our PCC candidates got in train to make sure that when elected they are going to be delivering from day one, looking beyond the election and actually delivering from day one?
I think, just to answer your point on the poll, I think what's interesting is the way RUSI, they present it as 50% don't rather than 50% do, which I think tells you a lot about the mood. There's a very negative mood about PCCs, and I think it's the job of all the people in this room to change that. And you know, the tremendous energy today, but I'm just not sure how you go about translating that to the broader public in just sort of 6 weeks' time.
I think you demonstrate it by delivering from day one.
Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, it's really about what happens once we have the commissioners rather than anything we can do in the next 6 weeks to try and engage more people in the actual taking part?
From my view, there will be roughly 20 Conservative PCCs in post from November the 16th. There will be roughly 20 Labour PCCs in post. The acid test of this is what they deliver, not just in the first 130 days, but actually over the term, the first full term. And coming back to Gordon's point, that's when the turnout actually goes up, because the PCCs that aren't delivering, the public will want to vote them out.
Yeah.
Very good.
Oliver Chandler from Bernardo's Children's Charity. Bernardo's is the largest organisation working with victims of child sexual exploitation in the country, and we're currently running a campaign asking PCC candidates to sign up and show their support and set out what they'll do to tackle this issue if they're elected. We've already had a question on domestic violence, but I think sexual exploitation is quite a significantly different issue. At the most extreme end, as we've seen in the recent case in Rochdale, it can be an extremely serious form of organised crime, which I think is actually very complex for the police to deal with, and a correct response would involve real multi-agency and, of course, cross-border work. I was wondering what the opportunities the panel thinks are for PCCs in tackling that crime.
Rochdale is a really good point, isn't it? I mean, would Rochdale have been different had you had a PCC system in place rather than the status quo?
Well, I think this is a really interesting question. I, in my professional career, have done a lot of research in very deprived communities, and I did a piece of research about 4 years ago in a town in South Yorkshire, and it involved going around talking to all of the various organisations, including the voluntary sector, working with vulnerable girls. And I can tell you it was happening in that town then, because they told me about it. So I think you absolutely have to get in there and you have to find out where it's happening, because if you talk to the people who are actually working with these girls, they will tell you it's happening, because I heard it myself, and nobody in that community was doing anything about it, and they were scared even to talk about it. So, and I came away from that shocked that that was going on, and it's still going on there now, I can bet you. So whoever the PCC is in that particular area, I might give them a ring when they get elected. But I think we really have to take it very seriously and not assume that because you've got some nice rural, quiet town that it's not happening, because I think there is evidence that it might be. So I think it's really up to the PCCs to try and find out, by talking to the people who are really working with these communities, what's going on, and then make sure that people do something about it.
It is 9:30, so we can, if there's one more, we can do one more, or if not.
Can I just comment on that last point, because it's about the partnership. This is where this true cross-cutting applies. Where you will find out about the child exploitation is by the health service being prepared to tell you when they're getting repeat negative STD tests come in, particularly from groups of young girls from the same area. It is a precursor of that type of grooming and trafficking. And that's the sort of thing that PCCs will be able to get out in terms of information.
There was just one more hand at the back, so it seems rude not to take that one, and then we'll call it that morning.
Good morning, my name is Ahmed Omar and I'm a student at Cadbury College.
So do you mind speaking up?
Okay, my name is Ahmed Omar and I'm a student at Cadbury College, and I wanted to ask you, sir, on the far right, what your views are on crime in highly populated areas of ethnic minorities. And I don't want to be around the bush because these are areas that suffer the most crime. And I wanted to ask you also, if prevention...
Is that you or me?
You. I wanted to ask you, sir, on the far right.
I'm on your left.
Yeah, the far right, sir, you over there.
Me. Sorry, it's a question for me. Okay. Well, listen. I think. First of all, I think Gordon's alluded to this. Cities are very, very complex places, and I represented a part of London that couldn't be different if you looked at parts of Fulham around Parsons Green, where I live, and then White City, Shepherd's Bush. When you go up to the borders of Brent. Very urban grain, very different, and a lot of crime in some of those areas. But actually throughout my borough it was the #1 issue, and I absolutely understood why we had to put more resources, deploy more resources into difficult areas, frankly. It's absolutely logical to me as a local politician. I'm absolutely understood by the public. You do not need to see all those people walking around Parsons Green and South Park. They need to be doing a lot of good work in Shepherd's Bush. And when we're talking about the race issue, I mean, I do find that is very troubling, but I think we need to move away from the anecdote and start to look at the statistics, understanding the BME confidence gap and why it might be wider in some parts of London than others, and track that over time, and then start to have an educated debate about how we can narrow that and how does it compare to other parts of the country, because something the Commissioner said in public was that the BME confidence gap is actually far larger in many other parts of the country, so there's a real job of work for some PCCs, never mind what the Met. So my answer is yes, we've got to do something about crime, because crime affects everybody. It affects people with very little or nothing, but it also affects the rich. In those neighbourhoods, if we don't do something about that, frankly, those neighbourhoods turn in on themselves. The neighbourhoods decline, they degrade, the shops leave, the jobs go. You know, you get an embittered underclass. So that's why, and I heard this from someone from North America, Chief of Police in Milwaukee. He said, you know, the police are the first economic development agency in the city. They are there to ensure we have the preconditions for prosperity. So it's absolutely essential we put the resources into those high, dense urban neighbourhoods and make a real difference. And that's why we as Conservatives understand the importance of policing and having order as a precondition for the social mobility and opportunity that we all believe in.
Right, on that, thank you all for coming, and I wish all the PCC candidates in the room the very best of luck, and I sincerely hope that we're back here in a year all talking about what a great success it's been. So best of luck to all of you, and thank you very much.